In the spring of 2003, a photography journal called Aperture published a letter. It was submitted posthumously. The man who wrote it had died 6 weeks earlier, quietly, in a care home outside Baltimore, with no family present and no obituary worth noting. He had asked his solicitor to hold the letter for 30 days after his death before releasing it. He wanted to be unreachable when it landed. The letter was 4 pages long. By the fourth paragraph, 3 editors had stopped breathing. His name was Thomas Aldrin. He had worked for the Farm Security Administration between 1935 and 1941. He was, by most measures, a competent photographer, not brilliant, not remembered. The kind of man whose name appears in footnotes rather than headlines. He had spent 67 years carrying something that the letter now laid down, with the particular exhaustion of a man who had waited too long and knew it. He wrote, "In the summer of 1936, I followed a colleague to Oklahoma without her knowledge. I watched her fall in love with a man she was trying to protect. I took the photograph she had refused to publish, and I sent it to Life magazine under my own name while she slept." He wrote, "She never told him. She let him believe she had done it. I do not know whether that was love or devastation or both. I know that I destroyed 2 people and called it conviction." He wrote, "I have thought about this every day for 67 years. I am writing it down now because I am 89 years old and there is no one left to protect." The letter ended there. 3 people were named in it: Thomas Aldrin, who wrote it, Eleanor Marsh, the colleague he followed, and a man named Daniel Jones, a Dust Bowl farmer from Boise City, Oklahoma, who saw his own face on a million newsstands in the autumn of 1936 and drew the only conclusion available to him: that the woman he loved had betrayed him. He was wrong. He died in 1971 not knowing that. To understand what 3 people were doing on the Oklahoma Panhandle in the summer of 1936, you have to understand what America had become by then. The Great Depression had not arrived the way catastrophes announce themselves, loudly, in a form you can prepare for. It had moved the way groundwater moves, silently beneath the surface, undermining foundations before the surface cracked. By 1936, 1 in 4 American workers had no employment. Banks had collapsed in every state, and in the southern plains, Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, Colorado, something stranger and more savage had happened simultaneously. The earth itself had turned against the people living on it. Decades of aggressive plowing had severed the root systems anchoring the topsoil. Then the rain stopped. Then the wind began. Dust clouds 3 miles high. Skies blackening at noon. Children dying of dust pneumonia, their lungs filling the way an hourglass fills, grain by grain, with no reversal possible. 300,000 people abandoned the region between 1930 and 1940. They drove west with everything they could carry and told themselves they were leaving temporarily. Most never returned. Franklin Roosevelt's administration understood a specific problem. The American public, insulated in its eastern cities, could not feel what was happening in the interior. The suffering needed a face. In 1935, the Farm Security Administration dispatched a small team of photographers across the country with a single directive from Roy Stryker, the economist who ran the program: make it impossible to look away. Most of the photographers Stryker hired became famous. Their work hangs in museums. Their names appear in history books. Eleanor Marsh's name appears in neither. She was born in Cincinnati in 1909, daughter of a union organizer blacklisted from the meatpacking industry when she was 12. She watched her family lose everything slowly, not in a single collapse, but in the grinding, incremental way poverty actually works, one small surrender at a time. She learned that the only weapon available to people without power was visibility, that the truth, documented precisely and placed before the right eyes, could shift what the world was willing to accept. She studied photography at Columbia on a scholarship, graduated 1933 into the deepest trench of the Depression, spent 2 years on commercial work she despised, and walked into Roy Stryker's Washington office in March 1935 with a portfolio from Appalachian mining communities. Stryker studied the photographs for 11 minutes in silence. Then he hired her. In the spring of 1936, he sent her to the Oklahoma Panhandle. He wanted photographs of the people who had refused to leave. "Find me the people who refuse to leave," he wrote. "Show me what refusal looks like." Eleanor underlined that instruction on the train west. She had no way of knowing she was about to meet its most complete expression. She also had no way of knowing that someone was watching her board that train. Thomas Aldrin had been in love with Eleanor Marsh for 14 months. He had never told her. He was 31, careful, possessed of the specific paralysis that afflicts people who want something so badly they cannot risk asking for it. He was a competent photographer, solid rather than inspired, the kind of professional whose name appears in footnotes rather than headlines. He knew Eleanor was exceptional. He had watched her work in the eastern states from a respectful and aching distance. He told himself the feeling would pass. It didn't. When Roy Stryker mentioned, in late April 1936, that he was considering sending a second photographer to Oklahoma to supplement Eleanor's material, Thomas volunteered before the sentence was finished. Stryker told him to give Eleanor a 2-week head start and to focus on the northern Panhandle, away from where she was working. Thomas agreed to these terms. He did not honor them. He arrived in Boise City on May 17th, set up in a boarding house on the opposite side of town. Identified Eleanor's Ford parked each morning outside a farmhouse 12 miles north, and every morning from a distance his telephoto lens could swallow. He watched. He told himself he was keeping an eye on a colleague. He told himself this so many times it almost became true. He watched Eleanor photograph the fence posts and the windmill and the dry creek bed, day after day, never crossing the property line. He watched a tall, deliberate man bring 2 tin mugs to the fence one morning and hand one to Eleanor and stand beside her in a silence that even Thomas, at 200 meters, could feel the weight of. He understood exactly what was happening. He kept watching anyway. Daniel Jones was born in 1902 in Boise City, third generation on the same quarter section of Panhandle earth his grandfather Heinrich had broken in 1881. Heinrich had arrived from Württemberg with $40 and a belief so deep it functioned as architecture, that a man who owned his land owned his life, and that self-sufficiency was the only freedom worth having. Daniel inherited that land and that belief equally. He married Clara Hoffman in 1928. They had a daughter, Ruth, in 1930. They had 3 good years. Then the rain stopped. By 1934, Clara was sitting at the kitchen table with her coat on at noon in July. Her body had decided ahead of her mind to be ready. She left in October 1934, took Ruth to her sister's house in Tulsa, and told Daniel she would return when it rained. She meant it when she said it. The rains didn't come for 4 more years. Daniel understood why she left. He didn't blame her. He thought about leaving himself, stood in the yard some mornings and calculated what departure would cost, and arrived each time at the same conclusion: the land would come back. 3 generations of a family's life could not have pointed at nothing. He declined every government relief program. Not from stubbornness, from a carefully held position that the moment you accepted rescue, you had conceded you could not save yourself. And once you made that concession, something essential was gone. By May 1936, he had been alone on the farm for 18 months, surviving on a kitchen garden, stored grain, and a partial winter wheat yield from a sheltered plot he had planted himself. He was, by every external measure, a man the depression had ground to nothing. He absolutely did not believe this. On the morning of May 3, 1936, Eleanor's dusty Ford pulled up the dirt track. Daniel came through his door with a rifle held loosely at his side, not threatening, just present, and said 4 words. "Not you. Not here." Eleanor drove away. She came back the next morning, and Thomas Aldrin, 200 meters away in the dry scrub, raised his camera and began to document what he was watching. For 6 weeks, Eleanor photographed everything around Daniel except Daniel. She never crossed his property line without invitation. She photographed the terrain, the fence posts half buried by drifting dust, the dead creek bed, the windmill standing in a field that had forgotten how to grow things. She arrived before 7 each morning. She worked until the light went flat. She drove back to the boarding house in Boise City, 12 miles south, and developed her material in a bathroom rigged as a darkroom. She was waiting for something she couldn't name and didn't rush. On May 18th, he brought coffee to the fence line. He handed her a tin mug and stood beside her and looked at what she was photographing without comment. They drank in silence. He took the mug back and walked to the house. She sat still for a long time after he went inside. May 22nd, he appeared at the fence and stopped at a distance just slightly too far for comfortable conversation, as if he wanted the words to earn their crossing. 3 weeks, he said. What are you actually looking for? The truth of what's happening here. Whose truth? The question stopped her. Not because she didn't have an answer, because his version of the question was better than any answer she'd prepared. What followed was 40 minutes of genuine argument. The first time Eleanor would write in a letter she never sent, that she had been truly met rather than merely heard. He believed that photographing poverty stripped people of the complexity that made them human, that the transaction, a suffering face exchange for a comfortable person's sympathy, was a form of extraction dressed as compassion. Eleanor disagreed. She meant it when she disagreed. She had given her life to the belief that visibility was salvation. Neither moved the other. But that evening, sitting in her car outside the boarding house, she understood that something had shifted beneath her position, something she didn't yet have a word for. She came back Friday, and Saturday, and Monday. The rifle didn't reappear. He didn't invite her onto the property, and she didn't cross the line. But the distance between them, measurable in meters and in something less quantifiable, was narrowing at a rate that neither of them acknowledged aloud. 200 meters away in the dry scrub to the east, Thomas was also narrowing a distance. His telephoto lens had a reach of 400 meters. He had learned over 3 weeks of watching exactly what Eleanor's routine looked like, exactly when Daniel appeared, exactly how long they stood at the fence before one of them turned away. He told himself he was gathering material. He told himself this so many times it almost became true. June 1st, Daniel led Eleanor across the yard to a cellar door set into the earth beside the house. He pulled it open and held up a lantern. She saw shelves lined with preserved vegetables, grain sacks, seed envelopes labeled in his careful handwriting, equipment parts clean and organized. Winter wheat, he said, smaller plot, more sheltered, partial yield. She understood what she was being shown, not poverty performing itself for a camera. Survival, deliberate, competent, sovereign. She photographed the seed envelopes, not him. He noticed. The following week, he showed her the house. His parents on the wall, wedding photograph, his father in a suit that didn't fit, his mother with the expression of someone who has just made an irrevocable decision and is at peace with it, his daughter's room, the small bed still made up, Ruth's drawings pinned to the wall, sons and horses, and a house that looked like this house, drawn by a 4-year-old who was now 8 and living in Tulsa. Eleanor stood in that doorway and did not raise the camera. The instinct, usually reflexive, usually faster than thought, did not come. She stood there and understood, in the specific wordless way that bodies understand things before minds do, that she was somewhere she had not expected to be. June 9th. She was preparing to leave when the sky turned the particular shade of yellow that meant a dust storm was building to the northwest. "Cellar," Daniel said from the doorway. They went down together. He pulled the door shut above them. Outside, the storm arrived, a sound like a sustained exhalation, as if the sky had been holding its breath for months and had finally stopped. They sat on opposite sides of the cellar and talked into the darkness. She told him about her father, the Union Hall, the blacklisting, the way a family loses itself quietly. He told her about Clara, not with bitterness, with the careful precision of a man who had examined something painful from enough angles to understand all of them. Clara had not been wrong to leave. He had not been wrong to stay. They were simply two people whose endurance pointed in different directions, and love had not been strong enough to resolve the difference. 2 hours, then silence above them. He pushed the cellar door open onto a sky gone orange with settling dust. They stood in it, side by side, the farm covered in a fresh layer of red earth. Eleanor became aware, standing there, that the distance between them had closed to something she could no longer call professional. She said nothing about it. She drove to Boise City and sat on her bed and looked at the wall until the light outside changed. In the scrub to the east, Thomas Aldrin had sheltered in his car during the storm. When it cleared, he raised his lens toward the cellar door. He photographed Eleanor and Daniel standing in the aftermath, side by side, the farm behind them, the orange sky above them, a quality between them that even a telephoto lens at 200 meters could not mistake for anything other than what it was. He put the camera down. He sat in his car for a very long time. June 12th, 1936. Eleanor arrived at the farm at 6:45, before the light hardened. Daniel was in the field, the sheltered plot where the partial wheat yield had survived, turning the earth along the edges of the surviving crop by hand, with the focused economy of a man who had learned to make every movement count. She stood at the fence. She loaded the camera. She raised it. She took 43 frames. She knew before she finished the roll. In the way photographers know, not intellectually but physically, a certainty that moves through the hands. She knew that one frame was the best photograph she had ever taken. His face at three-quarter profile, the ruined landscape behind him, the quality of his posture, not defiant, not broken, but enduring in a way that looked almost like choice. A man working land that was slowly destroying him, doing it with the complete commitment of someone who had decided and would decide again. It was the photograph Roy Stryker had sent her to find. She developed it that night. When his face surfaced in the developer tray, when that expression emerged from the chemical dark, in that light against that landscape, she stood over the tray and felt the full weight of what she'd made and what she was going to do about it. She wrote to Stryker at midnight. She had what he needed. 2 days later, she went back to the farm. She told Daniel about the photograph, described it precisely, told him it was the best work she'd done. He was quiet. Then, "Are you going to send it?" She didn't answer. He nodded slowly. "Show me," he said. She brought it the following morning. He held the print in both hands for a long time, set it on the table, looked at it from a slight distance as if assessing something that required perspective to see clearly. "That is a good photograph," he said. "I understand why you want to send it. But that photograph tells the truth about the Dust Bowl. It does not tell the truth about me. It shows a man being ground to nothing by forces beyond him. That is not what I am." He paused. "You took that with my trust, not with my permission. If you publish it, you are telling a story about me that I did not agree to tell." She had assembled the counter-argument carefully. The utilitarian arithmetic, one man's privacy against thousands of families that photograph, might help move Congress to assist. The professional obligation, the historical one. She delivered none of it, because sitting across from him, she could not make herself believe it was the right argument. She drove back to Boise City that afternoon, went to the bathroom, took the negative from her bag, held it up to the lamp, his face in reverse, light where there should be dark. She looked at it for a long time, then she destroyed it. She wrote to Stryker at 4 in the morning. "The Oklahoma piece isn't ready," sealed the envelope, sat with it until the sky lightened. At 7, she drove to the farm. "I destroyed the negative," she said. He looked at her, not surprise, more like the careful stillness of someone who had believed something might happen and is now absorbing the fact that it did. "Why?" "Because you were right." The wind moved through the yard. A scrap of paper scraped across the dirt near the fence. "I'll make breakfast," he said. What neither of them knew, what Eleanor would not discover for another 3 months, was that on the morning of June 12th, 200 meters away in the dry scrub to the east of the property, Thomas had also raised his camera. He had taken 31 frames. One of them was nearly identical to Eleanor's. He had watched her destroy her negative. He had watched her drive to the farm the following morning and come back lighter. The way people come back when they have given something up and found the giving bearable. He understood what she had sacrificed and what it meant to her. He sent his print to Life magazine on June 19th. He did not tell Eleanor. The August 1936 issue of Life magazine reached newsstands on July 28th. Eleanor was in the boarding house in Boise City when she saw it. She had walked to the general store for supplies. The magazine was on the rack by the door. She saw the cover first, and then, turning the pages with hands that had gone entirely cold, she found it. Page 14 and 15, a 2-page spread. His face, his field, his posture. The caption read, "Oklahoma Panhandle, May 1936, photographed by Thomas Aldrin." She stood in the general store for a long time. The proprietor asked her twice if she was all right. She didn't hear him either time. She drove to the farm. She needed to get there before he saw it, needed to explain, to show him the letter she'd sent Stryker, to prove that the negative she'd made was gone, that she had chosen him over everything the photograph could have meant. She was 40 minutes too late. Daniel had driven to Boise City that morning for supplies. He had seen the magazine on the same rack by the same door. He had stood there reading the caption, Thomas Aldrin, a name he didn't know, a name that meant nothing to him, and understood only that the image existed, that someone had been on his land, that a camera had found him despite everything he'd done to prevent it. He drove back to the farm. He was on the porch when Eleanor's car appeared on the dirt track. He watched her cross the yard. She stopped at the bottom of the steps. He was holding the magazine. She could see from his face that he had already arrived at his conclusion. I didn't send it, she said. Daniel, I destroyed my negative. You have to. There were two of you. Not a question, a thing he was confirming out loud. I didn't know about him. I didn't know Stryker had sent anyone else. I would never. His name is on it. I know, I didn't know he was there. I swear to you, I didn't. You swear, he said it quietly. The quietness was worse than anger would have been. You swear to me, standing on my land, where you came with a camera and a government salary and a story about truth. Daniel, I trusted you. Those three words. The way he said them, not with fury, not with the performance of betrayal, but with the flat, exhausted precision of a man stating a fact he wished were not true. They landed in Eleanor's chest like something structural giving way. She could have said Thomas's name. She could have told Daniel about the telephoto lens, the 200 meters, the man who had watched them from the scrub and sent the image while she slept. She could have made Daniel understand that she was a victim of this as completely as he was. She didn't. Later, in the letter she wrote and never sent, in the journal entries her executor found after her death, she would try to explain why. The closest she came was this. If I had told him about Thomas, he would have gone looking for Thomas. And Thomas, for all he had done, had believed in the same thing I believed in. He had just been willing to pay a price I wasn't. I could not send Daniel toward a man whose sin was conviction. I had too much of it myself to condemn it. She stood at the bottom of his steps and said nothing that could save her. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he went inside. He did not come back out. She stood in the yard until the light changed. Then she walked to her car. She drove back to Boise City. She packed her things. She drove north to catch the train to California, where Roy Stryker's telegram was waiting with a new assignment. She did not contact Thomas. She did not tell Stryker what had happened. She carried the silence the way you carry something heavy, by adjusting your posture around it until the adjustment becomes invisible. 3 weeks later, a brief item appeared in the Boise City paper. Daniel Jones had sold the northern section of his land, the sheltered plot where the winter wheat had survived. He had used the money to bring Ruth home from Tulsa for the summer. He had not left the Panhandle. He had not broken, but he had sold the field. Eleanor read the item in a California diner, holding a coffee that had gone cold. She understood what the field had meant to him. She understood what selling it meant. She sat with that understanding for the rest of her life. In California, Eleanor Marsh took the photographs that defined her career. She was different after Oklahoma. Slower, more deliberate with her subjects, talking longer before raising the camera, thinking more carefully about what she was taking and what it cost the person giving it. Roy Stryker, writing to a colleague in 1938, described her as the photographer whose work had changed over a single year from excellent to something he didn't have a word for. She photographs people, he wrote, as if she knows what it costs them. He had no idea. She continued with the FSA until 1942. She married once, a journalist, a genuinely kind man who found her too interior to fully reach. They divorced in 1949. She worked international assignments through the 1950s and 1960s. The work was important. The life was solitary. She never spoke Thomas Aldrin's name in any interview, any letter, any recorded conversation. She died in Cincinnati in 1991, age 82. Her archive, 14,000 negatives, all cataloged, all developed, all accounted for. One canister, separate from the rest, labeled in her handwriting, Oklahoma, July 1936. Do not develop. The last photograph she ever took of Daniel Jones, one frame, on the morning she left his farm, before Life magazine, and the confrontation and everything that followed. She had sealed it and carried it for 55 years without opening it. She could not develop it without standing in a dark room, watching his face appear in the chemical dark. She could not do that and remain intact. And she could not afford to come apart because there was still work to do. Her estate honored the instruction without question. Daniel Jones did not leave the Panhandle. The rains returned in 1938. He replanted. He rebuilt. By the mid-1940s, the farm was producing again, not large, not prosperous, but his. He never accepted government relief, not during the Dust Bowl, not after. He remarried in 1951, a widow named Frances, quiet and practical. They had 12 reasonable years before Frances died of a stroke in 1963. Ruth visited every summer after that, brought her children, watched her father walk the land with them, the way his grandfather had walked it with him, naming things, passing the conviction down. He never mentioned Eleanor Marsh. Not once. He had excised her the way the land excised moisture, completely, leaving no visible trace. Except this. In a journal he kept from 1940 until his death, there are no entries for the month of June. Every year, 31 years of June pages, blank, not torn out, simply left empty, as if the month itself had been placed beyond language. He died in 1971, 69 years old, on the same land where he was born. Ruth found the journal in the desk off the kitchen. She turned the empty June pages one by one, didn't know what they meant, filed it with his papers, and did not think about it again for 32 years. Thomas Aldrin lived until 2003. He worked as a photographer until 1978, then taught at a small college in Maryland. He won a regional award in 1961. He was by all accounts a decent teacher and an adequate colleague. He never married. The Aperture letter was the first time he had spoken about Oklahoma to anyone. He wrote, "Eleanor Marsh was the finest photographer I ever knew and the finest person. What I did to her and to the man she loved was not a crime under any law I'm aware of. It has felt like one for 67 years. He wrote, "She never told him it was me. She protected me for 55 years. I do not know how to account for that, except to say that she was more generous than I deserved and more silent than anyone should have to be." He wrote, "If Daniel Jones had known the truth, perhaps nothing would have changed. Perhaps Eleanor's silence was mercy rather than sacrifice. I have argued both sides of this question for 67 years, and I have not reached a verdict. I am putting this down now because I am 89 years old, and there is no one left to protect." Ruth Jones, Daniel's daughter, was 71 years old when the Aperture letter was published in 2003. She read it at her kitchen table in Tulsa on a Tuesday morning, with a cup of coffee that went cold without her noticing. She read it 3 times. Then she drove to her filing cabinet and found her father's papers, the box she had not opened since she'd carried it from the farmhouse in 1971. She found the journal with the empty June pages. She found a photograph she had seen before and never fully considered. A woman at a fence line in flat Panhandle light, carrying a camera, looking at something just outside the frame. And she found something she had not found before, a single sheet of paper folded twice, tucked inside the back cover of the journal. Her father's handwriting, undated, 4 lines. She read them. She sat with them for a long time. Then she called the magazine and asked to speak to the editor who had published the letter. She told him about the journal. She told him about the empty June pages. She told him about the photograph of the woman at the fence line. She told him what her father had written on the back of it, the only record he had ever made of Eleanor Marsh's existence. E.M. May, 1936. And she read him the 4 lines from the folded sheet inside the journal. Her father had written them sometime between 1940 and 1971. 31 years of possible dates. No way to narrow it further. He had written them and folded them and put them inside the back cover of the journal where the June pages were blank. He had never sent them. He had never shown them to anyone. They were not addressed to Eleanor. They were not addressed to anyone. They read, "She photographed the seed envelopes, Not me. I have thought about that every day since. She was the only person who ever came here and understood the difference between what a man is and what his circumstances look like from a distance. I should have asked her to stay. I should have asked. Daniel Jones died in 1971 believing that Eleanor Marsh had published his photograph. He died believing that the woman who had photographed his seed envelopes instead of his face, the woman who had understood more precisely than anyone before or since, the difference between a man and his circumstances had ultimately seen him the same way as everyone else. He was wrong. She had burned the negative. She had stood in his yard in silence rather than speak Thomas Aldrin's name. She had carried an undeveloped roll of film in her bag for 55 years because it was the only photograph of him she had taken for herself, and she could not develop it without standing in a dark room watching his face appear in the chemical dark. And she could not do that without falling apart, and she could not fall apart because there was still work to do. He died not knowing any of this. I should have asked. 4 words. A lifetime too late. The truest thing either of them ever said about what happened between them, and he said it to a page in a journal that no one found for 32 years. Somewhere in Washington, D.C., in a climate-controlled archive, Eleanor Marsh's canister is still sealed. Oklahoma, July 1936. Do not develop. The last photograph she ever took of him, his face still waiting in the dark. Thomas Aldrin destroyed 2 people and called it conviction. Eleanor Marsh protected the man who destroyed her and called it silence. Daniel Jones died on his land, unbowed by everything the world had thrown at him, and was undone in the end by 4 words he never said to the right person. I should have asked. Tell me in the comments, who carries the most weight in this story? Thomas, who acted? Eleanor, who stayed silent? Or Daniel, who never asked? And if you have ever let something go unsaid to someone who needed to hear it, I want to know that too. Like this video, subscribe and share. Thank you for watching.